The real underlying issue for Joe Biden, put aside the senescence, put aside the fact that he seems to be declining into senility. The man is not a good president. He had a 32% approval rating before any of this. And so because of that, I think that the supplanting of him with somebody else would then have to make exactly the same case that Biden has made, which is that Donald Trump is an unprecedented threat to the Republic. I always thought that was a weak attack line because we've seen him be president. Yeah. That attack line didn't work in 2016 when he wasn't president. Now we saw him be president, and hell, it was pretty good. And that's what the American people are saying as well.
It's frankly a miracle that Donald Trump is still alive. If he hadn't momentarily turned his head away from the crowd, which he rarely ever does, Trump would now be dead. America could be facing deadly unrest, maybe even civil war. Trump's opponents have screamed about the need to protect American democracy from him. But there's no greater threat to democracy than the failure to protect our political leaders so that voters can decide who governs them. But there are also difficult questions for political leaders on both sides about the febrile and hostile nature of US politics. If Trump is the new Hitler, a threat to the very survival of the Republic, as so many on the left have been calling him for so long, is there not a moral justification for assassinating him? How do they explain, if there isn't, why they keep calling him the new Hitler? That is the grim picture that his critics, of course, have painted for so long. Only a few days ago, Biden told donors that it was time to put Trump in a bullseye. Clearly, America needs to turn the temperature down. But amid the tragedy and chaos of Saturday night, Trump somehow managed to rise up. His face splattered in blood, and he punched the air in defiance. That's already become one of the most iconic images in American history, and it may well become the image that defines Donald Trump's historic return to the White House. Ben Shapiro joins me. Ben, an extraordinary moment in history. Donald Trump coming literally within an inch, maybe less, of being assassinated. First of all, where were you when you heard about this?
So I was on the West Coast. I'd actually been doing Bill Maher's show, so I was in Los Angeles, and it was Sabbath for me. My security came in and told me that President Trump had been shot. They said that he was okay, that they were sort of informing me moment to moment. But, I mean, it is one of those moments in American history where you're going to remember exactly where you were when you heard it, like 9/11. In my lifetime, that was really sort of the only other one where I remember where I was when I heard it. This is going to be one of them for sure.
And what was your immediate response in your head to what was unfurling?
I think that my immediate response was shock, but not surprise. And I think, unfortunately, that was the response of a lot of Americans, was I'm shocked that this would happen in the modern age. We haven't had the assassination of a political figure, a really serious attempted assassination, since Ronald Reagan in the early 80s. But by the same token, I wasn't surprised because, again, the pitch of the rhetoric has been so high during this campaign and for the last 10 years, specifically about Donald Trump. I mean, I think if any other political figure had been shot, it would have been more surprising. Donald Trump being shot at is incredibly unsurprising, given the fact that, as you said, Piers, there's been an attempt to turn him into Orange Hitler since pretty much 2015, and that has ratcheted up day by day as the Democratic Party becomes more desperate to see him not reelected. That has really sort of hit high pitch. And the New Republic, 6 days before this assassination attempt, ran a cover image of Donald Trump mashed up with Adolf Hitler. Like 2 days before this assassination attempt, the president of the United States, Joe Biden, said that the American people want a president, not a dictator. When you say that kind of stuff over and over and over, again, the only person responsible for an assassination attempt is the prospective assassin. But if you keep turning up the heat on the pot of boiling water, you can't at least be surprised when the water boils over.
Right. I mean, I've got a mashup here of people on the left calling Trump Hitler. Let's take a look.
Many are openly comparing Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler.
Trump's been compared to the German dictator by some throughout his presidential campaign.
Is Donald Trump really a fascist?
Maria Chappelle-Nadal posted this picture to Twitter yesterday. It appears to compare Donald Trump to Hitler.
Former President Trump doubles down on a phrase many say he borrowed from Hitler.
President Fantasyland decided to take a page out of Adolf Hitler's playbook last week.
Yes, Donald Trump took his Hitler cosplay to the next level.
Do you want to clear the air because you think you're being unfavorably compared to Donald Trump?
A unified Reich? That's Hitler's language. That's not America's.
New York's Daily News ran this front page earlier this week. Trump is Hitler.
According to the Washington Post, Trump has long toyed with the language of fascists.
Former President Donald Trump allegedly praised Adolf Hitler, saying the Nazi leader had, quote, done some good things.
You know, Ben, I appeared, actually, by coincidence, on Bill Maher's show several years ago. And I was on with a comedian called Jim Jeffries, a left-wing comedian, Australian, and we got into a serious debate about the fact the left kept calling Trump Hitler. And I said, look, I'm not in the tank here for Trump either way. But what I would say is Adolf Hitler murdered 12 million people. He perpetrated the Holocaust of Jewish people. More than 6 million of them were slaughtered in concentration camps. The idea that Donald Trump should be mentioned in the same breath as somebody like that is deeply offensive and completely factually wrong. Never mind anything else. But it didn't stop. This was like 3 years ago, I think, when I was on that show saying that. And I got roundly attacked by Jeffries. He told me, uttered a profanity and told me to go stick myself and so on. But it didn't mean I was wrong. In fact, if anything, like you, the more they call Trump Hitler, the more concerned I've become. Because, as I said in my monologue there, the moral justification for assassinating Hitler is very clear, right? Most people would agree that Adolf Hitler should have been killed for what he did. So if you apply that brand to Donald Trump, to a warped, deranged, impressionable young mind, who knows what the motivation of this shooter was? But it's not entirely surprising that people may want to eliminate the new Hitler.
That's exactly right. And again, all you have to do to understand how ridiculous the argument is to say, actual Hitler, there's an assassination attempt. We say, well, we wish our best to actual Hitler. We hope that actual Hitler and his family are doing well. Our prayers go out to actual Hitler. Well, you wouldn't say that, obviously, because you'd want Hitler to be assassinated. I mean, we celebrate in movies people who tried to assassinate Hitler.
It was Trump that said, they're not only after me, they're also after you. And we know this because they've called Trump voters Nazis and Hitler and all these other things for years now. So when they say the rhetoric needs to stop, I'm going to need the Democratic Party and the Democratic loyalists to be that example. Once they stop, then we can stop defending ourselves. Because that's what it is. It's an attack from the left that forces people to either recoil or to fight back. And historically, anytime that somebody fights back, that's when you're labeled some type of ist, right? Or phobe, or whatever they want to, whatever the flavor of the month insult is. So I agree, the rhetoric needs to stop. But the reality is, I've been saying for years now, if you stop attacking Trump with lies, then I won't be forced to defend him.
So if you keep actually making that comparison, and it's not just the Hitler comparison, it's the idea that if Donald Trump wins, there will never be another election in the United States. If Donald Trump wins, that this place will be the Handmaid's Tale, which is literally something that the Biden-Harris headquarters tweeted out like 2 weeks ago. They tweeted out a picture from the Handmaid's Tale saying Donald Trump's Project 2025 will effectuate this in America. The moral argument in favor of then getting rid of that person in order to save the country is fairly strong.
And that right there is a good example of how the rhetoric seeps in. Ben Shapiro just repeated that it's Donald Trump's Project 2025, when the reality is he has denounced Project 2025. It is not part of Trump's agenda. If you want to know what Trump's agenda is, you can look it up on his website. But Project 2025 has nothing to do with Trump or his plans in his presidency. It's a fear-mongering tactic. And it's been repeated over and over again to the point where even Ben Shapiro just repeated it as Trump's Project 2025. That lie, that scenario forces me to have to come out here and say, no, it's not Trump's Project 2025. It's not Trump's agenda. If they would stop with the rhetoric on the front end, I wouldn't have to come out here and remind people that it's not Trump's plan. But the fact remains that a lie will circle around the earth once before the truth hits the front door, or whatever that saying is. And that's the only tactic that the Democratic Party and the mainstream media who serves them can use to win elections. They can't come out there and win an election on a good platform, on a good plan. It's only my enemy is the bad guy. And it's led to the point where Donald Trump was nearly killed this last weekend by a person that has been indoctrinated and brainwashed by that very same mainstream media that follows the Democratic Party. When you consider that he's 20 years old, you go back 8 years to the 2016, first Trump election, and all the rhetoric that the Democrats and the Democratic Party have said about, anti-vaxxers, calling people Nazis, homophobic, all these things. I mean, the list goes on. And if you have any kind of recall, you've lived it. No matter which side you're on, you remember. So nearly half this kid's life, he's been indoctrinated and brainwashed to believe that Trump supporters and Donald Trump deserve nothing.
What do you think would have happened if Trump had actually been killed?
I have no idea. I mean, one thing I think would not have happened, and I think there was a lot of talk about a civil war would have broken out. Again, I don't think that Americans were going to go pick up guns and start shooting each other. But would it have been a crisis moment in American politics? Absolutely. Would it put us one step further on the road to a breakup of the country? 100%. Yeah. Are we at the point where the tinderbox is so dry that any spark is going to set it off? I don't think we're quite there yet, thank God. But I think this is a great warning moment to say, well, we better, actually take down that that temperature. We got to prevent that from moving one step further along, because effectively speaking, the Civil War in the United States was presaged for literally decades. And then in the last 15 years before the Civil War, things gradually ramped up and ramped up and ramped up and ramped up. And at any point along that line, you could theoretically come to some sort of workable solution and move away from that. It's time for Americans to do that, as opposed to continuing to ramp things up. And so, again, if he'd been shot, it would have taken us a much further step along the line to an actual breakup of the country, for sure.
Yeah, and I actually hope that Donald Trump, and I'm seeing signs that he may have already worked this out for himself, and maybe his brush with death, literally, has cemented his instincts that maybe things have got out of hand now. And I hope that, given that I think he's almost now 100% certain to be elected president again, I hope he does come with a different tone. There's no doubt when Democrats say, well, what about Trump? I do think it's way too early to be saying that when a guy just literally had an attempt on his life. But there is a legitimate thing to say that Trump's language, the way he abuses opponents and so on, that he's gone too far. And it would be incredibly disarming to many of Trump's critics if, unlike Joe Biden, he did actually acknowledge that and say it's time for all of us to dial down the rhetoric.
And I got to cut in real quick. Before Ben answers, let me say, I believe Trump tried for 4 years to appease the Democrats. That's why he tried so hard to prove the things that they were accusing him of were false. Even to the point where a lot of Trump supporters weren't happy with it. They were saying, hey man, just do what we want you to do, rather than catering to these Democrats who are just going to attack you at every opportunity they have. I'm not saying Trump isn't crass, but a lot of the things he said were in response to somebody else's attack. I mean, the day that he was inaugurated, they said on the news that the impeachment begins today. They didn't give him any kind of chance to prove himself. Not only that, they attacked him with the Russian collusion that we now know was all fake. They impeached him over his phone call where he called the Ukrainian president and said, hey, what's the deal with what Biden's talking about here on TV, saying that he withheld taxpayer funding while he was vice president in order to get the investigator fired who was looking into the company called Burisma that his son Hunter happened to be on the board of, which I believe was actually Donald Trump's obligation to investigate and look into. They impeached him for that. Now all the cases that they brought against him, trying to get him thrown in jail, the 34 felonies over misdemeanors that they tried to compound into felonies. They appointed Jack Smith rather than having him elected, who then tried to bring charges against Trump over the classified documents, which thankfully was just thrown out yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. All these nonsense attacks on Donald Trump, and what is he supposed to do? Just sit there and take it? That's not how a strong person reacts. That's not how an alpha male responds to attacks. They attack back and they defend themselves.
I mean, I totally agree with that. And I think that, again, what you've seen from President Trump in this campaign, this is the shocking part of his campaign, because it's very different from 2020, which was very inflammatory, or 2016, which was very inflammatory. This has been a significantly more moderate campaign in both tone and tenor. And I think that because of that, it's been disarming for the Biden campaign. They keep trying to paint him as this fascist, and it was not going over with the American people, which is why Joe Biden was losing. And that's why he had to keep ramping up the rhetoric with regard to President Trump. President Trump has already said that he's completely rewritten his speech for the RNC for Thursday night when he gives his keynote address. He has told everybody who's speaking that they should be speaking about American unity, about moving forward arm in arm together. And the reality is, again, President Trump is a non-ideological figure. And people who have been watching his administration and people who watch what he says positionally understand he's a non-ideological figure. I think that if President Trump gets in his head, and I think he does at this point have in his head, that he can be a transformative American figure and bring Americans back together in a way that actually does make America great again, it could be a signal shift in the trajectory of American history.
I mean, there's another extraordinary story developing today. The judge in Florida has dismissed a criminal case relating to classified documents found at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. That's another major legal win for Trump. You know, this attempt to weaponize the justice system against him has pretty much spectacularly backfired. I mean, they went first with the Stormy Daniels attempt over him, you know, shuffling paperwork to hide the fact he paid a porn star for an alleged one-night stand 20 years ago. It all sounded ridiculous at the time it was being brought against him. It turned out to be ridiculous. He got convicted, but off the back of that, his poll ratings surged even higher, and he got about $150 million worth of donations in about 2 weeks. I mean, none of this strategy from the left has worked, has it? The attempt to go after him and try and incarcerate him to stop him being re-elected.
I mean, that is clearly true. I'm a religious person, and so, you know, I tend to see the hand of God in history. It's kind of hard not to see the hand of God when you realize, as you said at the very top of the show, Piers, that if Donald Trump turns his head about 2 inches, he's dead at this point. You know, there's something happening that I don't think anybody can really explain without reference to something that they don't understand happening with regard to President Trump. As far as the dismissal of the documents case, you know, once again, that documents case was the most serious of the cases against President Trump. Judge Eileen Cannon may be reversed on appeal. It'll be too late for the election. And there's a very clear effort to use the legal system to prohibit Donald Trump from becoming president of the United States again. Everybody could see it, and it's not going to work. There are a lot of reports today that House Democrats are basically in a state of surrender about this election. They feel that Donald Trump has already won it. It's way too early to ever say that. I mean, we're only in July at this point. There could be something unprecedented that happens, since we've now had 2 unprecedented things happen in the last month: the collapse of President Biden on the stage, at least imagistically, and then the attempted assassination of President Trump. So there's a long way to go. With that said, is Donald Trump clearly the front runner at this point? Would it be shocking if he lost this? I would be shocked if he lost this election at this point.
I cannot see anything but a Trump victory now. One of the problems the Democrats will have is that their whole attack line outside of the weaponization of the justice system has been to basically use the most egregious, offensive and catastrophic language about Trump. And I'm not sure that act is going to play with the American people now. They keep calling him a dictator. They keep calling him the new Hitler. I just think the American people are going to rebel against that. And so the guy just nearly got shot because of the consequences of this kind of language swilling around. Everyone has to stop. And if the Democrats don't have that as a weapon, if Joe Biden doesn't have that as a weapon against Trump, what's he left with? He can't run on his appearance, on his faculties, on his cognitive ability, or any of those things. All he has is Trump is the new Hitler. He's the devil. He must be stopped. If you don't have that in your armory, I don't know what you have.
The real underlying issue for Joe Biden, put aside the senescence, put aside the fact that he seems to be declining into senility. The man is not a good president. He had a 32% approval rating before any of this. And so because of that, I think that the supplanting of him with somebody else would then have to make exactly the same case that Biden has made, which is that Donald Trump is an unprecedented threat to the Republic. I always thought that was a weak attack line because we've seen him be president. Yeah. That attack line didn't work in 2016 when he wasn't president. Now we saw him be president, and hell, it was pretty good. And that's what the American people are saying as well.
If you're in the middle, if you're not on the toxic right or left, really the sort of extremities, if you're a pretty moderate person, which most Americans, in my estimation, are, and you're independent perhaps and sort of working out where to vote and stuff, you cannot but look at what happened at the weekend to Donald Trump and not feel better towards him. I just think
100%.
You know,
that's
can't.
100% true.
Yeah.
And that's right. And by the way, they spent 3 weeks feeling worse about Joe Biden, and now they feel better about Donald Trump. And the unspoken reality of this campaign is that Donald Trump has actually grabbed the middle ground in American politics. Democrats keep trying to portray him as some sort of rabid right-winger. Donald Trump is not nearly as conservative as I am on policy by far. And he's watered down the Republican Party platform to that extent.
Yeah.
I was speaking with Speaker Johnson a little bit earlier today, and Speaker Johnson was saying that the Republican Party platform, it matters to sort of the party insiders, but everybody knows that Trump as president is not going to do any of the sort of more right-wing things, or he's very unlikely to do a lot of those things because, again, he's a pragmatist. The attempt to turn Donald Trump into some sort of right-wing Hitlerian bogeyman are utterly insubstantial and ridiculous on their face.
Yeah.
I pretty much agree with that. Donald Trump was a Democrat before he decided to run on the Republican ticket. That was one of the first gripes and attacks that they used against Donald Trump when he announced that he was going to actually make a run in the 2016 election. They said, hey, you guys got a Democrat running your party. Why would you vote for him? These types of things, which is a great example of how he's not this right-wing, crazy, Hitlerian character like Ben Shapiro just said. It's the rhetoric of the mainstream media that serve the left that has shifted the American people into believing that he is something bad for this country, which is the same exact rhetoric that all these people are saying needs to end. I believe it's really important for us to pay attention to what the mainstream media is saying about Donald Trump moving forward into this 2024 election in these last 4 months that we have till we get to November. And if they continue the rhetoric, then they're just a bunch of hypocrites. And when they say the rhetoric needs to stop, they're actually saying you Trump supporters need to stop defending yourselves and be victims. And that's just not going to happen. So once they stop the attacks, we'll stop defending ourselves, and then we can move on as a civilized country. But it's on them to lead by example. They now need to dig themselves out of the same hole that they got themselves into. And in my opinion, it's on them if something else happens in the next few months. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap this one up. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with anybody that you think might need to see it. And I'll see you guys in the next one.